Hello everyone, welcome back to Common Misplays. We are a Pauper gameplay channel, and today we're going to be running through a league as requested by an absolute landslide by you guys with Mono White Heroic. So it is a pretty stock list as to what you'll see with Mono White Heroic these days. The deck has seen a couple of recent upgrades, recent inclusions from Theros Beyond Death. But we'll run through the list very quickly and then we'll jump into some gameplay. So in terms of creatures, the deck runs the heroic creatures. We have Lagoonaband Trailblazer, which is really our ideal turn 1 play. Its high toughness makes it very, very difficult for our opponents to deal with a 1 mana spell. So essentially when we're on the play, they're really going to struggle to remove this before we can start suiting it up. In terms of other 1 mana creatures, we have Sacred Cat, just because it's resilient, it's recurable, has a little bit of lifelink as well, so has some fringe benefit against burn. Deathblade Elite. This is quite a high variance card. Sometimes it's terrible, but in the matchups it's good. It is so unbelievably good. Against things like elves, it can be just unbeatable. I have actually had elves opponents even today where I've dropped a Deathblade Elite, dropped a 1 mana enchantment turn 2, and they've just conceded. That is how good this card is when you can get it going. You pair this with any of Cartouche, Hyena Umbra, Ethereal Armor, anything that gives it first strike, and then its ability to provoke an opponent's creatures just means that it will mow down and eat their creatures every single turn. Even when you can't do that, sometimes just being able to take away your opponent's only effective blocker can be so relevant. So if they have a Gurmag Angler, for example, and you don't have any flying creatures, just being able to get in with your random Seekers and Lagoonaband Trailblazers can be really relevant. So this card, I wouldn't ever want to run the 4/4 of, but I think as a 3 of can be super relevant in certain matchups. Two drop creatures, we have 2 different varieties. We have Seeker of the Way, which ever since its downshift has been a mainstay of the deck. I am seeing some versions of the deck running Core Skyfisher now instead, and I'm not really sure why. I guess it's just to give the deck more evasive threats, but I found Seeker of the Way is a very, very useful card, especially obviously in the burn matchup. And then a Crow and Skyguard, very fragile for a 2 mana creature, but having a flying heroic creature is super relevant in certain matchups. Some decks you just aren't really going to struggle to get damage through against, Wall Combo for example, so having a flying creature is incredibly relevant in those matchups. Beyond that, we have our creatures, then we have our ways of pumping them up. We have lots of 1 mana enchantments, lots of 1 mana protection spells at instant speed. So we have, in terms of enchantments, Cartouche of Solidarity will give us an extra body, really good edict protection. The thing this deck wants to see least is turn 1 swamp from an opponent. Anything that basically Bogles will struggle with, this deck can struggle with. So lots of edict effects we are going to struggle with. We do also have Hyena Umbra, so if they are casting directed kill spells, the likes of the recently downshifted Cast Down, we have got a way of getting around that to a certain point. Ethereal Armor, one of the most powerful cards in the deck. Once we start to get some of these chained up, if we can get 2 of these on 1 creature, for example, they become very big very quickly. The other recent inclusion from Theros Beyond Death, the first one, is Sentinel's Eyes, which for 1 mana gives them +1/+1 and Vigilance. The biggest part though is you can escape it from the graveyard to exile 2 cards, you pay its mana cost and you get it back. This is the closest white I think we'll ever get at common level to Rancor. And it's not really that close to Rancor, but it is about as close as you'll get to that recurable enchantment at 1 mana. It's not ideal, but the Vigilance can be very relevant, especially in aggro mirrors, where having something that plays attack and defense equally will do really well for you. It is probably the card I sideboard out the most because it's probably the least impactful, but it can be really helpful if you're trying to rebuild your board later in the game. If you're at a stage where it's turn 10, you have like 5 or 6 mana and you just need to be able to continue to play spells to pump up your creatures, the ability to be able to recur something from the graveyard can be really, really helpful. So beyond the enchantments, we do have a bunch of protection spells. this is kind of where this deck has a slight advantage over things like Mono Green Stompy, for example. That does obviously have Vines of Vastwood. We, however, have Emerge Unscathed, which is 1 mana. Target creature you control gains protection from a color of your choice until the end of turn and rebound. So it is 2 triggers for our Seekers, 2 triggers for our heroic creatures. Can be really good in terms of breaking board stalls. If your opponent can just block you out with lots of random derpy creatures, you can easily get through. So again, against things like Wall Combo, this can be the way you end up punching through for damage in the end. Stave Off is not a card you always see, but it's a card I believe in for this deck. It's one that I've played for a long time. I've never gone over to Chomano's Blessing. Chomano's Blessing can be really, really good in certain matchups. If you're playing against a mono-colored deck, like Mono Blue Delver, for example, it's an absolute house in that matchup, but I feel like Stave Off gives us interaction where we need it. This deck really struggles for main board interaction with our opponent. Stave Off will give us protection sometimes, and sometimes, because it's only target creature, it acts a lot in the same way that Vines of Vastwood does for Mono Green Stompy, in that it will give you some ability to break up opposing combos. So, not 20 minutes ago, I was playing a quick warm-up match against Stonehorn Tron. They went to ephemerate their Stonehorn Dignitary, boom, protection from white. At that point, they had obviously been relying on that. They ended up with nothing they were able to do. They just started frantically trying to draw cards, and then actually ended up with nothing they could do, and I won that game the next turn. That is what this card can do for you sometimes. You just need a way of being able to interact with your opponent. So, for example, if your opponent has a Vault Scourge, if they are Mono Green Stompy, and they go Rancor into Elephant Guide, you just go, well, now you have protection from green, all your stuff drops off you, you have a 1/1 again. Beyond that, the other Theros Beyond Death card, Karametra's Blessing, +2/+2, so this has replaced, so Sentinel's Eye is replaced in a lot of respects Defiant Strike as a 1-mana cycling spell, and Karametra's Blessing seems to replace Mutagenic Growth in a lot of lists. So Growth obviously has the benefit that it is a free spell for all intents and purposes. You pay 2 life for it. Karametra's Blessing is a pump and a protection in one at times. So +2/+2 until end of turn. If it's already enchanted, you get hexproof and indestructible. So it's very, very good in that way, in that it gives you a lot of benefits for doing what you want to do already. These 2 cards I've not had a ton of experience with. I've played a lot of Mono White Heroic, but not the most recent configuration you see in front of you. But these cards have done reasonably well for me. I talked obviously about having main board interaction. I do like to have 1 copy of Journey to Nowhere main board, just to know that I have an out, basically. So what I hate more than anything is in game 1 where your opponent plays something and you know you're just stone cold dead to it. And you know no matter how many cards you draw, no matter what you end up with, you're not going to win. Journey to Nowhere as a catch-all answer, just to have something to be able to do to what your opponent's trying to do, I like having it there. The other card that I've been toying around with, I've seen it in some 5-0 lists, I finally started trying it out, is Double Cleave. And this card, when you want it, is amazing. I think the biggest benefit Bogles has over this deck, as a sort of similar enchant up a creature, go tall rather than go wide deck, is that it can kill you a lot quicker than Mono White Heroic generally can. This gives you the punch, the power to kill an opponent turn 4, turn 5, as opposed to turn 7, 8, 9, when you're just swinging through with creatures. Consistently, this gives you, and especially against things like Stonehorn Tron, it gives you the ability to finish them before they can stabilize. You get a random 6, 7 powered creature, you deal then double that in damage, and just run them over before they can actually get to stabilizing against you. In my limited playtime with it, I've only played the deck 5 or 6 times with this card in. It's proven its worth a couple of times now already. I'm starting to become a believer in it. I have actually, since playing Stonehorn, in the last matchup before I sat down to record, I have put a copy into my sideboard as well. I know some of the 5-0 lists are running 2 in their sideboard. I'm not that far deep on it yet, but I'm willing to put 1 in the sideboard. Again, mainly it's going to be for the Tron matchups. Going into the sideboard, we have 2 Death Speakers. I like having a 1-mana creature that has protection from black, so again, especially against the mono-black control lists and blue-black control if we see it in the league, having something that's immune to cast down and all the other kind of random spells. It's good against Pestilence as well, in that no matter how many times they trigger their Pestilence, they can't damage it. It's good in that way, and generally in matchups where you want it, it will just side in for Deathblade Elites. Lifelink against, obviously, Burn, and sometimes against aggro as well, so this can come in for things like Sentinel's Eyes that aren't necessarily going to be super relevant against, say, mono green Stompy or, as I said, Burn. Shield of Duty and Reason is an incredibly good sideboard card for this deck, actually. It's probably the most powerful sideboard card we have. Against Elves, against Wall Combo, against Stompy, against Delver decks, against Tron, actually, because most of their creatures are blue. This just wrecks people's day, and they have very little way of dealing with it. If you can sneak it down early, your opponent can just never block you again. Again, as I said, a quick extra copy of Double Cleave, just in case we want to draw it more consistently. Sen's Enlistment is a card I've been playing around with for longer, grindier matchups. So if we want the ability to start rebuilding our board late game, having a random copy of this could be super relevant. I've not actually had the need to cast it in a game yet, in the limited time I've had it in my sideboard, but I'm interested to try it out, see if against things like mono black control and mono white pestilence, or white black pestilence I should say, see whether it holds its own. We have gut shots for Delver matchups and for Elves. We have Cursive Chains to deal with just all manner of things, really. It deals with anglers, it deals with that kind of thing quite happily, and it does also, as a fringe benefit, deal with Guardian of the Guild Pact as well, just as a multicolored spell. I was going to have 2 journeys in the sideboard, but I decided to diversify into Cursive Chains as well, just so I've got a couple of different threats, or different answers to deal with my opponent's threats. I did also have in my sideboard 1 Oblivion Ring as an absolute catch-all answer, but as we're only running 17 lands, and I needed a spot for my Double Cleave, I did cut that. And then finally, we have 3 Fragmentize. It helps against Boros, it helps against Affinity, it helps against Tron, taking away some of their colored sources. It is converted mana cost of 4 or less, so it does take care of Pestilence, it does take care of Prisms, Bonder's Ornaments, all manner of different things. It won't deal with Affinity's biggest things like Mirror Enforcers, but it will kill their lands, so it does also have that benefit. Sometimes you just turn 1, blow up their land, and they are just really sad about it. They just never recover from that. So that is the deck list, guys. We're going to run through a league and see how we get on. So I will catch you guys in game 1.